So we're talking about, in this lecture, innovation in mobile communication services. I was saying different technological standards have been designed and implemented at different time. Have a look also on the time span between the design and the implementation of different standards. This is particularly interesting. What kind of services can we talk about when we think of mobile communication? Voice for the first two generations, text messages for the second generation, data in different forms for the third and fourth generation. Okay? Now, the big trend right now in the third generation and fourth generation systems is the emergence of many different services. Okay? New services that have to do with three broad areas. The first one is entertainment, music, video, all sorts of services that you know very well. The second one is the news, so provision of information to the users. And the third fairly big area has to do with financial services. Okay, so the provision of financial news or the possibilities of making online trading with a mobile phone. Now, who do you think is profiting from this? So whenever, for example, a bank and a mobile operator decide to provide a mobile banking services, what they do is that they share revenues in a way. Okay? So they make an agreement on how to share profits. Who do you think is benefiting more? Where is the balance? Okay, telecommunication operator. Indeed, mobile service providers still have a big advantage in terms of revenues over content providers. We were making the example of a bank. We can think of any kind of content provider, music content provider, video provided. Okay, 65% of the revenues are currently gained by mobile operators, while only 35% of total revenues are gained by content providers. Okay, so even in the data environment, mobile service providers still have a very big percentage of revenue. Having said that, voice services still account for the vast majority of operators' revenues. So notwithstanding the fact that with the third and fourth generation standards, the technological opportunities have allowed companies to develop all sorts of multimedia services, this is a very important point. This is a very important issue. So we need to understand what's going on in the voice service environment in order to understand the innovation pattern in this particular industry. Okay? So what is innovation in mobile communication services then? We've discussed a bit the data environment. Think of voice. Okay? What is innovation in the voice services? He mentioned the text messages. That's probably an in-between innovation between voice and data. What else? What do we have? What do operators consider when they think of providing new services in the voice environment? Yes?
I guess from a technological point of view, probably the fact that you can call, have a, how do you say, face-to-face call, you can see the other.
Okay, video calling, let's say. Okay.
Or that you can call from wherever you want. I mean, that you have perfect territorial coverage, which is not obvious.
Okay.
Improving the service, basically.
Improving this, let's say, full coverage. I'll put it in bracket text messages. Others?
For example, something related to voicemails. I don't know, voicemail recognition and transcription.
Voicemail? Yes?
Can tariff be considered like, I don't know, innovative tariffs, you and me, or for example, if they provide us a very flat tariff for SMS, very cheap, everyone will buy it.
Okay. Yes. Tariffs, let's say flat versus whatever network effect based, if you want. The you and me type of tariffs. Okay, so video calling, providing a full coverage over a specific geographical area. Voicemail, yes, good example. Tariffs, this is a field where operators actually engage very much in the provision of innovation. Why is that? Well, we've understood that innovation is not just the provision of new product or of new infrastructure. In the mobile communication service environment, we can think of standards as related to voice services, okay? But they are provided somehow outside the industry, and they are forced in the sector by means of licensing. This is what Franzmann in 2002 discusses when he talks about innovation in the telecommunication environment. What he says is that it is important not to confuse R&D with innovation. Firms with very low R&D intensity may nevertheless be highly innovative, and this is what we know for the service sector. One example is MCI. MCI is used to be a US telecom operator. Family and friends billing innovation. Okay, this is how he calls them. That allowed company to offer preferential tariffs on several frequently called numbers, some sort of you and me tariff plan, and for a while gave the company a significant advantage over its rival AT&T. Although not falling under the conventional classification of R&D, this is a full quotation from the book, this innovation is indicative of the kinds of advances that may be made that do not involve R&D. Okay? So, highly growing sector, it is very innovative. Innovation comes from standard committees. It comes, of course, from the opportunities related to convergence, but it comes very much from the voice environment. And what we will try to do now is understand how can we conceive a tariff plan as something new, as an innovation in service. Okay? If we have time, we'll investigate a bit also the case of text messages. Now, in order to do so, we need to go back to the approach that we've described in terms of assimilation approach or integrative approach related to the service characteristics. Okay? Now, think of a tariff plan and think of it as made of different types of characteristics. For example, the tariff plan has the call connection fee. The tariff plan involves some sort of rebate mechanism. It allows on-net versus off-net price discrimination or time-based price discrimination. Okay? Do you know which is your tariff plan? Okay, how many of you know? Okay, how many don't? Okay, good. Good from our perspective, at least. Okay? So, think of a tariff plan as a vector of characteristics, or a set of different characteristics. Innovation in this sense might be conceived as a new tariff plan, which means as a tariff plan that involves one or two or three new characteristics, or the change in one of these characteristics. Okay? So what operators often do is they provide something new, which is maybe radical new or not radical new, okay, by changing, by leveraging upon these specific characteristics. You remember the different types of innovation that we've discussed following Galuschen-Weisstein. We had radical innovation, incremental innovation, improvement, formalization, and so on and so forth. Now, of course, not all of them are relevant for the case of mobile communication services, very often not for all the cases of the sector that we're investigating. Radical innovations, if we think of radical innovations, we should think about new bundles of characteristics, like following strictly the approach. Okay? And in this respect, data services would be considered as radical innovation. Okay? Something that has to do with the text messages, for example, or with the internet connection. Okay? What Stefano was talking about when he mentioned this type of innovation, where this could be conceived as a radical innovation. Okay? It is not very common in the sector. Very often it's provided by new entrants in the sector that have somehow to provide something new to the users in order to make users moving around. More often in the sector is a so-called incremental innovation. Now remember, the concept of incremental innovation in the approach that we used is stronger than what we usually think of when we think of incremental innovation, okay? So the idea is that a new characteristic is either added or removed for the first time. So we have a change in the tariff plan because, for example, operators decide to eliminate the call connection fee. Okay? Up to a certain point, you had in Europe a call connection fee, so just by using the phone, you had to pay something. Then operators decided to remove that. That's an incremental innovation. What would be an improvement innovation? You remember, innovation that changed the content of the characteristics without actually changing the characteristics. So if we consider a tariff plan as a set of characteristics, what could be an improvement innovation?
For example, you make the call, and right after the call, they give you how much you spent.
Okay, which is the rebate mechanism. Now, if you decide to introduce the rebate mechanism, that would be an incremental innovation because you introduce something that wasn't there.
No, they just send you the bill, the effectual bill of your call.
Ah, okay, so they send you the actual bill of your call. Or? Being? Okay, faster or better or something. I mean, you have a characteristic there, and then you change the content in a way. It might also be, for example, that you change the time zone upon which you discriminate. Okay, for example, the tariff plan used to provide different charges for morning call and evening call. Then you add afternoon call. This is an improvement innovation if we consider a tariff plan. Recombinative innovation, okay, you can combine together different service characteristics for the first time. And this, again, would be the provision of a new tariff plan, okay? Of course, the degree of innovativeness embedded in these innovations is very different because if I just change the content of a characteristic, this is not a big issue. If I introduce new bundles of characteristics, strategy in the market, well, that's a radical innovation. We're still in the field of voice services, okay? It's very difficult to think of a formalization innovation in the context of voice services, okay? You must probably think of standards, but then that's a more traditional way of innovating with respect to innovation in services. Now, this is the framework in which companies can innovate. So they provide new tariff plans by adding or changing existing characteristics. What is the role of demand? Now, we've understood investigating different sectors and the general theory of innovation in services that demand have a very important role. Okay. How can demand affect innovation? Through which channels? Think of a very general framework. So how can we think of demand affecting innovation? How does usage pattern, for example, affect innovation in this sector, or in general, if you want? Okay. There is all the, let's say, lead user framework. Okay. What do they say about demand and innovation? Yes, Michela, sorry.
No, I think that users affect mobile communication providers through their behavior, maybe, because like there are many tariff plans segmented along user behavior and needs.
Okay, so there is an issue of lead users. Okay, you know that there is a very big literature, which I say you quote very often, so it's something that got impressed in your mind, which says that there are particular users that like to experiment, that are pioneers, that provide feedback to the companies, and so on and so forth. But Michela correctly says, well, besides lead users, okay, if we think of the tariff plan, if we think of mobile operators, what do they have is also information on users' behavior, patterns. So I do not really need to be a lead user in order to affect innovation in this sector. Okay? Both these ideas have to do with the concept of users as information providers, if you want. So through my behavior or through the feedback that I can give to a company, basically I provide information. Okay? So users can be a source of information. Okay? Either because, again, they are leading the demand in a way, or simply because, as we are in a service sector, there is a lot of user-producer interaction. This is one of the most important features of these sectors in general, and in particular in mobile communication services sector. Okay? So user behaviors, attitude can be tracked by companies, and this is a very powerful source of information. And then there is a more basic role of the users that is very important if you think in terms of the development of innovation. Think simply, okay? So lead users, user behaviors, information, this is something which is advanced in a way. Think simply about the demand. Yes?
Some kind of local network effects where all your friends have pointed or whatever.
Okay. Well, let's start from network effects. And we'll try to arrive to the more basic role of users. Well, network effects, as you well know, is the phenomenon by which my utility increases if someone else is using the same product, or in this case, the same operator as I'm using. Now, when network effects are in place, okay, how can firms benefit from them? When do actually firms benefit from network effects? In which situation? Yes?
When there is a termination-based high discrimination.
Okay, this is the way in which they try to enforce network effect, okay? But think of the firm strategies, okay? When do you think that firms have incentive?
Network effects lock customers.
They lock customer in, okay? When does it work? I mean, when do you think network effect is really effective? When you reach a critical mass, so you have to have big numbers, okay? So very basically, and this is something that very often is sort of neglected in the literature, you have to think that demand in the first place provides incentive to innovate just because you have lots of users there, okay? This might be one way, so by exploiting network effects that are in the market, okay? But the idea is that as market grows, I have more demand out there, I have more people, I can sell the products to a larger market, okay? So I have more incentives to innovate. This really goes back to Schmockler and other scholars, a very basic role for the users. Now all the lead users literature have sort of shaded this, okay? But this is very important. So the idea is that I have more incentive when I innovate if the market is very large, okay? Problem with this is that as market grows, demand becomes more and more heterogeneous. So the incentives to innovate are preserved, but we have to remember that we can have not just one market, but many different markets, okay? So if I innovate trying to target a specific group of customers, I might not be able to innovate targeting another group of customers. But in principle, okay, users not only provide a source of information, they also provide incentives, basic economic incentives, okay? So as the market grows, I have more incentive to innovate. As the market grows, I have more incentive to provide, for example, tariff plans that leverage upon the existence of network effect. If there are 2 users in the market, it doesn't make sense to enforce network effect, okay? As the market grows, the incentive to innovate grows with them, okay? Remember, however, that demand is extremely heterogeneous. What does this mean? What does this mean? It means that, think of the mobile communication sector. The heterogeneity of demand means that I have in the market over time different category of users that have very different willingness to pay and have very different patterns. Okay? So if I, for example, think of a new tariff plan that tries to exploit the existence of network effect, this is very different from a strategy that tries to enforce flat tariff. And what you see in the market is actually the coexistence of these 2 types of tariff plan among other tariff plans. Okay? What's behind this and what's behind this? What's behind the provision of flat tariffs? Who do you think is interested in buying a contract with a tariff structure which is flat?
Maybe both unconscious users or the user that have a network with a very heterogeneous set of friends with different providers.
Okay, for example, users who call different people with different providers. Okay, so I'm not really interested in having cheap prices for Vodafone users and very high prices for other users. You were saying more or less the same. Users that have a very large set of people they call. Okay, so even if we think of the difference between these 2 types of tariff plan, we can see that behind this there is a concept of very heterogeneous demand that affect the way in which firms innovate. Okay, this has to do with demand as a source of incentive to innovate. Now, think of demand as a source of information. Okay, what do you think are the strategies of the firms that want to invest in users as a source of information? Okay, how can firms exploit users in terms of information provision? Yes.
Maybe I think that like exploiting it directly is not so good because the pattern of consumption can be endogenous. I mean, I send less short messages because it's maybe too costly, but if they were cheaper, I would send more. So I cannot really infer a lot from user behavior.
Okay. Other idea? Yeah.
I check if my customer is calling for 800 euros a month. I check if he's spending only 30 euros.
Okay.
We are completely scheduled. It's terrible.
Okay.
All our information, how many minutes we spend, how much we...
Okay. So they have all sorts of information on users that use different tariff plans. What about the development of a new tariff plan? Because it is true that firms can track back all the calls that we make. They know exactly what is the pattern of our consumption. But if demand is very heterogeneous, what about the development of a new tariff plan?
Ad hoc. I mean, if you try to change operator, they just call you and say, okay, we know that you're a very good customer. You want to change, we're going to make an ad hoc. So
Okay.
Tariff for you, doing this, and this.
Okay, so they can develop ad hoc tariff plan. Okay, but in general, what we can say is that they do have imperfect information on demand characteristics, especially if you think about the development of new tariff plan. Okay, think about it in historical perspective, not just about the current time. Okay, when Tre introduced, I don't know, video calling services. Well, we do not have video calling here anymore. Okay, it wasn't really able to predict the success of that particular tariff plan. It was actually quite a failure in a way. Okay? If you introduce a tariff plan that leverages upon users being in different countries, for example, yeah, you can look at the pattern of communication between Italy and Switzerland, but still you have imperfect information, okay, when you want to provide a new tariff plan. This has another important consequence, which is that as soon as I introduce a new tariff plan, since we're talking about tariff, we're talking about price bundles in a way, of course, there is a risk of cannibalization, which means that I introduce a new tariff plan because I want to target a new group of users or because I want to extract more surplus from my existing users. I end up having all my users using just one tariff plans. Okay? And in that respect, the idea is that I might as well produce just one tariff plan and let all the users use that. Okay? Now, I write down here that the risk of cannibalization might be good or bad. Okay? The idea is that if I introduce a new tariff plan, I do so because I want some users to move to that tariff plan. So I want some churn rate, if you want, between the existing tariff plans and the new ones. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done so. Okay? Especially in the context of very mature markets. So at the very beginning, I might think of companies introducing new tariff plans in order to attract new users. So I don't know, diffusion is 20% in the market. I have 80% in the market out there that is waiting for tariff plans to come. Okay? I try to target people who are calling mostly during evening hours, for example. I develop a tariff plan that is specifically targeted for them. When the penetration rate reaches 100%, then the issue is very different. Okay? So the idea is, yes, I can actually attract new users, but the most important strategic objective that I have when I develop new tariff plans is either stealing users from competitors in the first place or discriminating among my own users. So I try to extract more and more profit because I look at Sebastiano's calling pattern and see I'm not really gaining as much as I could from his specific tariff plan. Okay? So the idea is that I want some users move around. I do not want all my users to switch to a new tariff plan. Okay? In any case, they have to consider that whenever they introduce something new, the risk of cannibalization increases. So there can be users that use the product or the tariff plan that was not designed for their own purpose. Fourth very important point, this is a sector where companies really imitate very much each other. If you look at the tariff plans of all European operators, within a country this is really astonishing, but even across different European countries, if you look at the structure of the tariff plan, of the set of characteristics, if you want, okay, there is really a lot of imitation. And here, patents, of course, do not work. Standards do not work. Really, when you talk about voice services and tariff plan, it is really difficult to appropriate the result, if you want, of innovation. Okay? How can firms do that? Well, since in this context of easy imitation, price competition would rule, what companies try to do is enforce exogenous and endogenous switching costs. Okay? Which make pure price competition not very attractive. Yes?
Just on the cannibalization, is it more of a danger of cannibalization, or is it rather that it's worse than actually the advantage of economies of scope?
Yeah, exactly. Cannibalization is the idea that
in this sector, is it worse? Is it like more prominent the cannibalization than the advantage of actually economies of scope?
it depends very much on the tariff plan you consider. So over time, there have been tariff plans that have caused, in relative terms, losses to companies because users were moving to the new tariff plans because overall it was more convenient. So they were providing a new tariff plan to discriminate across different types of users, and the result was that all users were using the new tariff plan because it was cheaper. So very often cannibalization is also the result of a mistake of companies, of course. Okay? Economies of scope would be there in the case of tariff plans that combine voice and services, so that you use basically the same service in order to have different type of characteristics. When we restrict the analysis to voice services cannibalization is really the idea that when I discriminate in terms of price or tariffs, I have all users using just the cheapest tariff plan, which shouldn't be there because the idea of developing new bundles of characteristics is, of course, that users shouldn't be able to say this is cheaper than this other tariff plan. Okay, but of course companies make mistakes as well. So the risk is not very high for very big companies, but it's there. So you try to make a trial and error process in a way, and if of course if you have many users, you can track more precisely the pattern of usage. Okay. Exogenous and endogenous switching costs, they mostly refer to network effect, but not only that. Okay, so of course if you have network effects, you have switching costs, consumers are locked in, and as they were saying, if all my friends have the same operator as I have, I do not want to change. I want a contract, a tariff plan that allows me to call at a cheaper rate those people instead of other people, and so on and so forth. What might be other sources of switching costs, which are endogenous in the sense that they are enforced by firm strategies? Okay. What do I lose if I change tariff plan? What?
For example, when the SIM card is locked into a telephone, you lose the phone.
Okay, in the case in which the SIM card is locked in the telephone, which is not always the case, I might, for example, lose all my phone numbers. Yeah, exactly. The Bluetooth actually still works like this, even if there is not lock-in.
Perhaps you can, if you got special tariffs, you're linked in by contract. I mean, you have to pay penalties if you.
Okay, if you have.
Break up the contract.
Okay, so let's say that not in case of prepaid cards, of course, but in case of contracts for business users or this sort of thing.
There's a big market about it.
Yeah. No. It is a big market. Yeah, I'm not questioning that. So you have switching costs. Well, in that case, they wouldn't be endogenous. They would be almost exogenous in the sense that you have to pay. But still, I mean, those are switching costs. What do you lose when you switch to a different? Think of switching to a different operator. Okay, you might lose network effect. You might lose your phone numbers. What else you might lose? Credits. Okay. Maybe not voice, but you might have different sorts of promotion going on, which you lose if you switch to another operator. So switching costs are there. Okay. They make price competition in a sector which would be ideally suitable for price competition less attractive. Okay. Now, we try to investigate, in particular, the Italian case, and this is, I think, a very interesting exercise to be performed on other countries, the data being there, which is not a trivial issue, with two research questions in mind. Okay, so the first is, how does demand affect the development of innovations in terms of number of innovations and in terms of the characteristics of innovation? Okay, so how do users who act as a source of information and a source of incentive affect operators' decision in terms of number and type, if you want, of new tariff plans? So this is the idea. In order to do so, we assume that if you think of users as a source of information, okay, the most natural proxy for this is the installed base of customers of a company. So the idea is that if it is true that we're all tracked, that companies know exactly who we are calling, at what time, how long we stay on the phone, and so on, then this is the installed base of users. Okay, so I can have more imperfect information if I look around in the market, but I know exactly what's going on in my own market. So I know what my users are actually doing, and I can retrieve lots of information by analyzing the behavior of users. And what about the incentives? because this has to do with demand as a source of information. And if you had to measure the incentive of firms, the demand as a source of incentives, what would you look at? Think of the general incentive of a company, a Vodafone, that has to provide a new tariff plan. Okay? If we look at the information she needs, then she has its own users. What about the more general incentives? So the idea that a large market actually increases the incentive to innovate. You might simply look at the degree of market saturation. Okay? It is very different if a company operates at the very early stages of the industry life cycle, if you want to call it like this, or if a company is a new entrant in the 3G environment. So, installed base of user of the specific company, Vodafone customer base, that's the source of information. The market penetration of mobile communication, okay, in a specific geographical area, that represents the incentive to innovate, okay? How do they work? So, think of the users as a source of information. Who has more advantage to provide innovation based upon that particular information? So if you think of a market where we have 4 companies, for example, okay, what would you expect in terms of innovation dynamics? Who has more incentive to innovate, thinking in terms of installed base of users?
Smaller companies.
Who?
The smaller.
The smaller, so the companies that have less users. Okay, other ideas? Why is that?
Because it wants to gain market share.
Yes, okay, but that's, okay. Sebastian.
Bigger installed base because they can leverage on more information.
Okay. You were talking more about the incentive to innovate given the fact that I want to attract new users. Okay? But I asked you, what about the users as a source of information? Okay? So the idea is that if I'm big in terms of installed base of users, I can leverage upon much more information. Okay? So the idea is that given the fact that I have an installed base of user which is very large, I can actually have more information, I can discriminate and develop new tariff plans that are probably going to be successful. So the installed base of customers affects the availability of information and also the capability of segmenting the market. Because the idea is that if I can retrieve information on the different behavior of my users, I can segment the market more precisely. So the first thing that we're trying to investigate is the fact that, other things being equal, if a firm has a higher installed base of users, okay, it is more stimulated to provide innovation. Okay? Of course, given a low risk of cannibalization. So the idea is that when I have lots of users, think again of Vodafone, I always make the Vodafone example, but it's a good example in this respect. Okay? I can actually control the information coming from very different users. Probably my user base is very heterogeneous. I can retrieve more information. Information is crucial to develop innovation. In this particular context, I can discriminate better. Okay? However, and now we come to the other comment, when I'm a very big company with lots of users, okay, what kind of innovations I do provide? I tend to provide sort of improvement innovation, maybe recombinative innovation, not innovation that actually change radically the characteristics of the tariff plan. It is very difficult that an incumbent, if you want, with a very large installed base of users introduces a radically new characteristic in a tariff plan. Okay? And if you look at the history of incremental innovation, incremental in the sense of Galuge and Weinstein, in the mobile communication sectors, most of them have been introduced not by incumbents, but by new entrants. Okay? They try to do something completely different. If I'm leveraging upon the information that I have from my users, I know what they do, and I try to change, to apply small changes to the existing tariff plans. So, for example, I can see that users are calling very much during afternoon hours. I have just 2 time slots, morning and evening. I introduce an additional one. Okay, this is all I can do. But if I want to implement tariff plans without a call connection fee, this is an innovation that is not really developed by incumbents or by very large companies. So this relates to the users as a source of information. Market saturation, okay? This defines very basically the incentives to innovate. So overall, given the information that I have more incentives to develop innovation, okay, when the market is very large. Because as the market grows, I have more demand. Demand is there, and this means that I can develop more innovation. What kind of innovation I develop as the market grows? So, numbers and then type of innovation. What do you see in the market? What have you seen over time since you bought your first mobile phone? What kind of contracts are indeed emerging in the market? Think of the empirical evidence. Think of your experience. Yeah.
They seem to bundle the plans a lot because since it's impossible to basically acquire new customers, they want to hang on to
Okay, so it is true that as market saturation grows, I have more incentive to innovate in the first place. But he's right. I mean, if I'm in a context of very high market saturation, okay, all I can do is try to recombine the existing tariff plan and to offer bundles of existing tariff plans in order, for example, to lock in existing users or in order to steal users from my companies. Okay? Other observation. So this is absolutely correct. And then what characteristics of tariff plan we do observe in the market? Yes?
Very good incentives for actually being with the same company. So calling the same company will actually not charge you anything.
Okay, so what I... Yeah. So what we were mentioning before, network effect, okay? This makes sense when the market is very large. As the market grows, I tend to provide more and more improvement or recombinative innovation, so to build bundle of different tariff plans and to implement tariff plans that try to discriminate across different networks. So we can expect a more major focus on improvement innovations, also because if you think about a tariff plan, the set of characteristics that can be introduced over time is limited. Okay? And second, we expect firms to offer contracts that are characterized by network effect first, and also by the rebate mechanisms. Okay? Again, if I have to call lots of users, I have incentive to buy a contract which gives me some money back. Okay? If I'm calling just 2 users, that doesn't make much sense. So the idea is that not only the type of innovation change over time as the market grows, but also the characteristics of the different tariff plans. Okay? Is this true? Now we try to see this in the case of Italy. Very briefly, you don't need to copy all that, just to give you an idea what kind of years we're talking about. First radio communication services, mid-70s. There was just one operator in the market, so the first G, second generation up to the tax standard. TIM, which actually the former monopoly was operating alone in the market. In 1994, the market was liberalized. This is a GSM era. Vodafone, well, the former Omnitel Pronto Italia, which is Vodafone, enters the market, and it introduces a radical innovation. This is really radical, which is the development of prepaid cards. Okay? It was introduced at the same time in Italy and in Portugal, quite interestingly. Okay? More or less, the two operators not decided, but we're splitting the market in terms of business users and consumers, with TIM focusing more on business users, again in relative terms, and Vodafone focusing more on consumers. And this is related to the fact that they provided, of course, tariff plan associated with prepaid cards. In 1997 and 2000, the government decided to assign 2 more licenses, one to Wind, which is still alive, one to Blue, which died soon after. Blue users were somewhat splitted among the 3 remaining operators. In 2002, UMTS services entered the market in Italy, and basically H3G enters the market. So in a just one slide, the history of the mobile communication service industry in Italy. Okay? Remember the years. So we had a time when we had just one operator, then a fairly large number of years in which we had the duopoly, and then more and more companies entered the market. Now we have, of course, also a set of mobile virtual network operators. So we analyzed all the tariff plans introduced in the market. 280 tariff plan, which is a considerable number if you think of it, introduced between October 1992 and October 2005 by 4 firms. Okay? Along 4 stages of the industry evolution: monopoly, duopoly, 3 firms, and 4 firms. What is a tariff plan? We said that the tariff plan is a set of characteristics. Okay? So consider that each tariff plan, each contract, whether it is a prepaid or a subscription-based contract, is defined as a set of 11 different characteristics: call connection fee, contract that discriminate along the network, contract that discriminate along the time zone, along geographical area, rebate mechanism, variable prices, all different sort of options that you might have in a contract. Okay? You can easily represent it as a vector. So you have one characteristic, it's 1. You do not have it, it's 0. Okay? Very easy in terms of representation. Of course, this is the number of tariff plans. You might have lots of replication. I told you before, firms tend to imitate each other very often in the market. Okay? So basically, you have 180 different vectors in terms of 1, 0, and 172 replication. So if you look at the characteristics that are present or absent in each tariff plan, okay, in 172 cases, you have a replication, okay, which means change, for example, in off-peak hours, change in different time zones, or tariff plans that are exactly the same as other operators. So out of 280 tariff plans, set of characteristics, in the sense of Galush-Weinstein, we have 232 innovations, which is also a considerable number, which suggests that price competition is not really high, or at least, let's say, it's lower than we would have expected. Okay? So, look at this table and think of the firm's installed base of consumers as a source of innovation. Okay? Now, the market share ranking is TIM, Vodafone, Wind, and 3, with TIM right now having around 40% of the market, Vodafone slightly less, and then Wind and 3, of course, with smaller market share. This is the number of innovations introduced, okay, by different companies. We're talking about all innovations, so incremental, recombinative, or improvement, okay? Basically, incremental and recombinative means that the vector is different, so the way in which you see the 1 and the zeros within the vector are different. So you have the call connection fee, you don't have it, then you reintroduce it. It's a change as respect to previous ones. Improvement innovations are more difficult to track, but of course they are the most common ones. Improvement innovation means I'm changing within one characteristics the specificities of that characteristics. Okay. Of course, we have imitation. We have also this renaming of tariff plans. So basically, you have the same tariff plan, just change the name for marketing purposes. So this is not very interesting. But look at the columns of total innovation. And look at the incumbent. Okay, so team, market leader, has always been market leader, first entrant in the market, developed 143 innovation. Okay, 52 Vodafone, Win 20, and 317. Now, you might tell me, yes.
Now, how can we compare as team is there since the beginning and HPE
Yes.
is there since a couple of years?
I expected this question. If you consider the number of innovation relatively to the number of years, team has still a very high percentage. Okay? Then 3 would be actually the second one, then Vodafone, and then Wind. Okay? But innovation is actually very much there. And this might be a bit surprising, okay, in the sense that, you know, we tend to think of innovation introduced by new entrants. We tend to think of incumbents just to imitate new entrants. Innovative patterns, what we see in this particular sector is that the installed base of users have a role, in the sense that they provide lots of information and they allow companies to price discriminate in a way which is profitable for them. Now, let's turn to the incentives. Okay, so given the companies, given the installed base, let's look at the evolution of different types of innovation over time. So here we are combining together all the different companies. Okay, we were suggesting that market saturation determines the type of innovation, and in particular that we have an increase in the number of improvement innovation, always in relative terms, and of recombinative innovation with respect to incremental innovation. In the end, incremental innovation are not really numerous. Okay, so the number of characteristics that you might think of when you design a tariff plan is, of course, limited. So over time, I mean, the very last innovation is in 2000. Okay, 1999 is when Wind decided to eliminate the call connection fee, just to give you some idea. But after a while, no more incremental innovation, again, in the sense of Galusion-Weinstein over a tariff plan. What we, of course, see is that the number of both improvement and recombinative innovation starts increasing very much over time. So the bulk of innovation is actually here. Okay? Yes, incumbents, operators, or market leaders tend to innovate very much, but what they do is they just leverage upon their existing users' information. This is the illustration of the characteristics of different tariff plans across different stages of industry evolution. I've just depicted here a set of characteristics, so these are not all the characteristics. I've put here the most relevant one. Look at the very initial stages of the industry evolution. So this is the percentage of total contracts developed in the monopoly stage that discriminate according to time base. This is how you should read this slide. Okay? So at the very beginning, what you observe is that most contracts were discriminating very much along time, along the day, some of them along location, although location, geographical location sort of moved away as a characteristic. No network-based price discrimination, no rebate mechanism, some variable prices, this is always there, but it's not very common. As soon as basically the third operator entered the market, firms started leveraging upon the market saturation. Okay? So the idea is the market is getting larger. So first, I have incentive to develop contracts that try to leverage upon the existence of network effect. Okay? As the market saturates, the idea is that I want to keep my users within my own network. I want to give incentive to my users not to go away in the first place. Second, the market is very big. Chances are pretty good that I'm making more calls than I used to do. So each single user, of course, is increasing the expenditure, or at least the time he or she is spending over the phone. So rebate mechanism makes sense, because I can provide users incentives to call lots of people. Okay? If I have to call just one person in the market, we are at a very low level of market saturation. Well, I can spend hours, but of course, chances are pretty good that I'm not really calling for a very long time. If I have to call 100 people, then in terms of minutes of calling, of course, this is much higher. Okay? And this is why over time we see an increased role both for network effects contracts and for contracts that introduce rebate mechanisms. Okay? So both in terms of number, in terms of type of innovation, and in terms of characteristics, what we see is that there is a shift, okay, which leverages upon market saturation in terms of which type of innovation you provide and which type of contracts you provide, given the fact that you have a certain installed base of users. So, of course, this is pulling together all the companies. So, to conclude, this is a very interesting sector because uncertainty is very high in terms of the outcome of an innovation. We think especially in the voice service environment, and users are extremely heterogeneous. Now, the heterogeneity of users is something that characterizes also other sectors. Even when we were talking about banks and insurances, we were talking about very different users. Uncertainty in the development of new services is particularly relevant for this specific sector. Okay? Something that you like very much, if you want, we could think of the mobile communication service sector as a sector where the Schumpeterian competition, so competition based more upon innovation, outperforms price competition. Okay? Again, we are using a notion of innovation which is not based upon the traditional R&D activity. We're talking about service innovation. We're talking about especially voice service innovation, which again makes for most of the revenues of companies. The installed base of users and the level of market saturation determine very much firms' innovative strategies. Okay, so they guide innovative strategies in different directions in terms of development of new tariff plans. Something that we haven't had the time to investigate in depth, though we started saying that this sector is peculiar also in terms of industrial dynamics, in the sense that the industrial dynamics is basically driven by the provision of licenses, which is a public sphere strategy. Okay? In many countries, you have an oligopoly. So basically, you have a few firms competing in the market. What happens is that the development of different types of innovation and the fact that companies are providing different characteristics within different tariff plans is driving a process of convergence of market share. Okay? So I don't have it here, but if you look at the picture of the dynamic of market shares in different, at least European countries, what you see is that there is a convergence process surely between the incumbent and the new entrant, but more and more also between the companies that have been in the market for a while and the new entrants. Why is this so? Because companies tend to exploit very much the heterogeneity of demand. So the empirical evidence tells that a new company is entering the market and is trying, in a context of market saturation, okay, is trying to target a specific segment that other companies haven't thought about. Okay, so for example, providing Skype services over mobile phone. Okay, the idea is that they tend to make more radical, more incremental, let's keep the terminology, innovation. Okay, so they tend to add characteristics while existing companies tend to leverage upon the existing tariff plans and voice services. Okay, so market share converge over time, but still we have a sector which is extremely concentrated because, again, the public intervention is still particularly strong. Okay, so we stop here. No time for investigating the text messages story, but if some of you are interested, I can provide you with some information. And next time we move away from the network-based services and we investigate knowledge-intensive business services. Thank you.